Thank you. I bet we have quite a few wild poets in our midst. Good morning again. It's so good to be together like this in all of the ways we can on this glorious summer morning. I really do find hope knowing we get to gather each week and hold certain intentions together and put them into our collective action. I also give thanks that we create space built in to tune in at a deeper level to whatever word God has for us today. And so in that spirit, I invite you to join me in a bit of prayer and take this moment to breathe in deeply, to feel your heartbeat, to tune into gratitude for the gift of being alive and being here together like this. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. I don't know what it is like to sit at the feet of Jesus exactly, but I do know what it is like to find myself in situations that challenge culturally prescribed roles. And that is what Mary is doing right here in the Gospel of Luke, because here she is in the position of the student, in that role of the learner, which in her time would have been only permitted for the men. As Matthew Skinner writes, a woman sits and learns at Jesus' feet, possibly in the process, transgressing cultural expectations, and Jesus approves, implying that all dimensions of sharing in his ministry are open to all people. And I don't know much about toiling behind the scenes in the kitchen because my man is the cook in our family. But I do know a whole lot about being distracted by many things, with all that I feel called to do and all that I must do and all that I need to do. And I know what it's like to feel angry at those who seem to be just sitting there. Are you with me? That is what Martha is holding in this story from the Gospel of Luke. And she comes to Jesus in protest and says, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all of the work?" And I don't know what it is like to be a prophet whose very words create a movement. But I do know what it is like to be one to share words that discomfort and challenge. And that is what Jesus is doing here in this story, because he tells both of them what to focus on, and even what might be hard to hear. Do you see yourself somewhere in this story too? We don't see these sisters appear together like this in any other place in the Synoptic Gospels. We do get a story later in the Gospel of John, but I think this story has something powerful for us. And with all that we are holding right now, it feels quite useful to hear Jesus comment on something that we can take in to give us some wisdom. Because part of this story is about how we are to show up, how we are to use our gifts, where we are to put our energy. And here Jesus kind of gives us an answer. He says, focus on the better part. Or put another way, I wonder if he is saying that the richest experience can be found when we are able to let ourselves be focused on this. Only one thing. Our right now. Our this moment. Whether that be washing dishes or learning from the master teacher, What if some of what will help us all feel more hopeful right now is being against multitasking? Are you with me? What if Jesus is inviting us to focus on just one thing? And here's the second wondering I have from this story right now. What if our wholeness and happiness comes from tending to both our inner and our outer lives? Again, from scholar Matthew Skinner, who wrote, neither the narrator in Luke or Jesus sets Martha's and Mary's activities in opposition. So what if they are meant to be held together? It could be easy to reduce this story in such a way that creates a mutually exclusive situation. And I have heard it interpreted that way. So Martha's doing is pitted against Mary's willingness to just sit. But if we are only doing and never sitting to listen, our doing might then be coming from a shallow place, a place that isn't centered away from ego. And if we are only stopping so we can tune out the world, but never taking actions to ease the suffering of others, then our prayers might not make us kinder and might not gift us with more peace. And our busyness might make us and the world worse off. I have learned that sometimes people mistake being busy for being effective. Have you noticed that? Sometimes we think, oh, if someone's busy, they're really important. Maybe not. Maybe they're just busy. It seems to me that Americans almost idolize a full calendar. Just this morning, Tim Kreider wrote in the New York Times, everyone is busy, worse than busy, exhausted, too wiped at the end of the day to do more than stress eat and binge watch and doom scroll. Yikes. But he says maybe we should just call it what it is now. An endless, frantic hamster wheel of survival. That sounds about right. I confess I got quite far in my spiritual journey before taking the Mary part seriously. I am a Martha. That comes naturally to me. There's too much to do. Stopping to sit and ponder, to quiet my mind, that seemed like a waste of time. It wasn't until I hit dead ends with certain dreams that I felt compelled to pause long enough to hear beyond busyness. I have shared with some of you before about the experience of being a part of starting a new church from scratch. It's now called Urban Sanctuary San Jose, and it's beautiful. But there were times in that process that I was so frustrated and so infused with worry that I needed to build a new kind of relationship with myself. And also a prayer chair in the garage that became a companion for a needed adventure into my inner life. I had thought things would go a certain way, but they weren't. But I was basically still just doing because I didn't know what else to do. Has anyone else ever had that experience? It's also crushing and maddening, chaotic and uncertain, and I had to do something else. And here is what it was. I had to stop doing. My old patterns weren't working, and I was forced to start sitting in silence. At first, it was just a minute, and then 2, and then 3, and then 10, and then longer. I set a timer and sat there, and slowly, one day at a time, it turned into another beginning, an awakening, a deepening that is ongoing, of course. But from that place, I began to feel this sense that some of the way religion is presented is performative and wide, but not very deep. And I found that instead of liturgy, I needed silence. I needed it, and it led me to such different places. And I see now I was just getting going on what Jesus called the better part, or the ability to let myself be present with the now, with what Jesus calls the one thing. Douglas John Hall writes that most liberal and moderate Protestants in North American context need most to hear Jesus' commendation of Mary, who did the one thing needful. On the occasion at hand, she did not immerse herself in the activity, but in the necessary business of listening to Jesus' words. He goes on, and I think we all need to pause and really take this in. I know I do. Activism without contemplation ends in aimless doing that usually aggravates existing difficulties. How we show up and whether it's rooted in a certain kind of place matters. And I have seen how different the results can be when people of faith are rooted in something other than just doing. During that season of all kinds of new beginnings and of letting old patterns die, I was desperate to meet people living into the new paradigm and trying new things. And over that time, I got to meet and learn from Episcopal priest Becca Stevens. She lives and works in Nashville, but she came to Berkeley in 2012 to teach a small group of us. After experiencing the death of her father and subsequent child abuse when she was 5, Becca longed to open a sanctuary for survivors and to offer a safe and loving community for women who had been victimized. So in 1997, she opened the first home that served as a sanctuary for 5 women. When we met with her, she told us they made sure the beds had high-quality sheets and nothing that was handed down. She wanted the women to feel seen, deserving of beauty. And 4 years later, the women were making huge strides in recovery, but struggling to become financially self-sufficient. And as Becca watched this, tuning in to what was needed, she, along with the residents and other volunteers, began making candles in the church basement. Then in 2001, a new social enterprise designed and driven by these women was born, and it is called Thistle Farms. Thistle Farms is about healing and housing women, and they also make candles and oils and jewelry, and now there's Thistle Farms Cafe where they work and share food. Instead of replicating what was, Becca tuned in and dared to taste a new thing. In her book, Practically Divine, she writes, "Now I can see that one loving gesture is practically divine. We have to do small things and believe a big difference is coming. It's like the miraculous drops of water that seep through mountain limestone. They gather themselves into springs that flow into creeks that merge into rivers. Our work is to envision the drops as oceans. We do our small part and know the powerful ocean of love and compassion is downstream. Each gesture can lead to liberation. The bravest thing we can do is not cling to old ideas, but step out and do something for love's sake." Maybe our one thing is simple, but not easy. Tuning in to our powerful ocean of love and compassion so our decisions and our doing add goodness, not less. And in doing our inner work, we are able to, as Becca says, not cling to old ideas, which allows us to be unattached and to make space for new ways of being. Beloved of God, if you are doing and not happy and wondering what else to try, maybe stop. Maybe stop doing. Take it from me. Maybe try sitting in silence and see what happens. I guarantee you will have different results. And if you are checked out and in a silo, privileged to avoid all that is wrong, maybe your silence needs to be transformed to do one thing that eases the pain of the whole. and shifts toward what is right, you will have different results. If you are a Mary, look to the Marthas here. And if you are a Martha, look to the Marys here. All of it is needed. We can't be everything and we can't do all the things and never stop. And neither can we be about tuning it all out and turning in. It is both and, inner and outer, daring to stop and listen and daring to keep on when people need fed. It's all of it, but not at the same time. Jesus invites us to focus on the better part, which is to let ourselves be focused on only one thing. Let us be about just one thing. I think that's how we will keep going in hope and joy. May it be so. Amen.